abject failure of the COP process. We all here know that the COP process, as it is not going to achieve anything. Yet again, we've got more empty promises. They're going to end deforestation. They said that 7 years ago. They did nothing. They said in Paris in 2015 they were going to do anything about emissions. They have done nothing. The economic paradigm we live within means they cannot do anything, because the economic beast that we live in is going to consume the world, and it has to do that. It has an imperative to do that. So unless we can build up the social power to fundamentally challenge that, COP will always be a failure. It will achieve as much as it achieved in the past 26 years, which is nothing. And does anyone really believe that we're going to get the change we need now without civil resistance, without people in their tens of thousands taking to the streets and occupying everything and not going home until we force constitutional change to shift power away from the political class, away from the corporate class, to ordinary people who are actually invested in our own future? Do you really believe electoralism is going to fix this? Does anyone believe that with the political situation we have in this country, we're going to vote our way out of this horror show? You don't believe that. You know that's not the case. It's going to take genuine civil resistance of the kind Exile has tried to model, but not really. It needs to be much more real. It needs to be much more rooted in communities. It's going to take industrial action. It's going to take general strikes. It's going to take a level of militancy we can't quite yet imagine it in this country, but we're going to have to build towards it, because nothing less than that is going to do.
We need complete economic transformation of our society. We need a national climate service set out in the 1 million climate jobs report. We need good climate jobs in renewable energy, insulating homes, mass public transport, public services. We need energy democracy based on public ownership and democratic control of energy. We need a tax system that makes the companies pay and stops them just avoiding and evading tax, because we know the government's plan is to tackle climate change by greenwashing profits, and they want to make workers and ordinary people pay for the economic restructuring that's needed. And if we want to get climate justice, we need to take on the bosses and take on the fossil fuel companies, because they will always put profit before people. And we need a sustainable world and a sustainable economy organised in the interests of planet and people.
The COP conference will be a failure. It will not present solutions to address the root cause of climate change. This is because, fundamentally, it is the economic system of capitalism that is driving climate change. The capitalist, imperialist leaders who are meeting at COP do not represent the interests of the working classes, the exploited, those suffering from war and want. Instead, they represent the interests of the fossil fuel corporations, international finance capital, weapons manufacturers, massive agri-businesses, huge mining firms, and all manner of leeches and parasites who are destroying the planet for profits. Any movement against climate change has to fight against capitalism.
We recognise that we are part of a global movement today. There are demonstrations not just across the country but across the world, because the world knows that a bunch of world leaders in Glasgow are not going to save our world and our planet. We have to do that.
Redbank Field is a beautifully, naturally rewilded urban green space in Chorlton that is currently threatened for development. It was a brickworks up until the 1920s, then it became an unlicensed tip, so it's full of toxic chemicals and gases that were dumped there. It was given by the council to Manchester Metropolitan University to use as sports playing fields in the 1970s, and they abandoned that in the 1990s, and since then it's an absolute textbook example of urban rewilding. It's hugely diverse. There are 1,400 trees, so it's a carbon sink. It helps the vast amount of pollution in the local area. There are over 65 bird species. There are hundreds of mammals that live there. It's a much needed green lung. If you take a drone up from Redbank Fields and take it into Manchester, you have this little spot of green, and then you have pure grey concrete until you get to the city centre here. There is a primary school right behind it whose children have come out to protest about the amount of air pollution and traffic congestion around there. It's a floodplain, so it helps to protect the local park and the local residents from flooding. If it's built on the huge amounts of rainwater that we know we're going to get more and more of as the climate continues to heat up, it's going to have nowhere to go except into those people's houses. It's a very beloved community resource. There are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people who use it to walk their dogs, to bring their children to play in a little bit of wilderness. And we know that wild areas that our children can play in have been reduced massively over the last few decades, and urban children don't have much access to wilderness, so it's incredibly important from that point of view. There are community picnics on it, there are history walks, there are women's night walks to reclaim the night so women can feel safe coming out and exploring in the darkness. There is an ancient earthwork that runs through it called the Nico Ditch. And Manchester Metropolitan University, who laughably claim to be the second greenest university in the UK, are going to flog it for profit. Not for social housing, for executive houses, which is the last thing that we need more of in Chorlton. So that's going to lead to more traffic, loss of biodiversity, the loss of our trees, the loss of the green space that the politicians are queuing up to tell us is so important to us. And we saw in lockdown that we need that green space for our physical health, we need it for our mental health. It's outrageous that they can make these green claims. And I recently went to Manchester Green Summit, for which Manchester Metropolitan University were one of the main sponsors. And they sat up there on the stage and they told us that they are innovating use of green hydrogen, that they have trained over 1,500 people in carbon literacy. And I asked the man on stage, what's the point of training people in carbon literacy when the most basic understanding of the climate crisis will tell you you cannot tarmac over a floodplain, you cannot get rid of the little bit of remaining biodiversity that we have, you cannot chop down trees and claim to be green. It's like saying you're going on a diet and you've given up burgers but not mentioning that you've taken up ice cream instead. It's absolutely senseless.
In order to tackle climate change and make significant progress in doing so, we have to address the need for demilitarization. It is a must. It is not a maybe or tomorrow or whatever. It is today, and it's a must. According to our friends at Conflict and Environment Observatory, the military is a huge energy user and contributes massively to climate change. The US military alone is a bigger polluter than as many as 140 countries. Let that sink in for a minute. Arms production and the supply chain that accompanies it consume immense amounts of fossil fuels. The destructive aftermath of war also does not help the problem at all. Literally, from start to finish, this industry is one of destruction, of pillage, and of death. When you take into account mining for minerals, production, testing of weapons, and their use, there is not one stage in which the arms industry is not harmful to the planet and to its people. For world leaders to meet in Glasgow like they did, shake hands and have their kumbaya moment to, solve the climate crisis, without addressing the vital need to downsize our militaries and rethink security is frankly the biggest slap in the face.
Whether you come from Niger, where the soil blows away and loses its fertility, or Sudan, where sandstorms threaten both agricultural and urban land, or Zimbabwe, which was once the grain basket of Africa, but is now suffering droughts and famine. And it's not just Africa, of course. Rising sea levels are swamping the lowlands in Bangladesh, and salt water is polluting drinking and agricultural water. Every day we are seeing indigenous people in Brazil driven from their land by deforestation and forest land sold to rich builders with government contacts. Or maybe you're from the Middle East, where temperatures are soaring above 50 degrees. We need to ask, how can they expect people to survive when the land is infertile, when there is nothing to eat, nothing to drink?
I'm here to tell you that one thing that is going on in Greater Manchester that is disgusting is that the Greater Manchester Pension Fund, which holds £28 billion of our money, our workers, our pensioners, our council taxpayers' money, and they put a huge proportion of that into the fossil fuel companies. And we need that to stop. We need it to stop soon. What you need to do is come out on demonstrations demonstrations like this, go to demonstrations that are called specifically about the pension fund, like one last Wednesday, but also keep the pressure on to our councillors. It's Tameside Council, the council for Ashton, Stalybridge, Hyde. It's that council that runs the pension fund. It's that council that is paying money to fossil fuel companies on our behalf, supporting them in their lives, in the way in which they value fossil fuels that should never be burnt. They keep valuing them and they invest our money in them, and that has got to stop. So can I call on everyone, please, to make sure that Greater Manchester's money comes out of fossil fuels. Write to your councillors, keep the pressure on, and we can win this one, but it will take all of us. Thank you.